How's everybody doing? As most of you know, or all of you know, I'm Michael. I'm the second child, and we're all like a lot like, or somewhat like one parent, somewhat like the other parent. And in some ways, I'm a lot like my dad. People tell me, but like everybody wrote their speech, and my sister wrote an essay, and I'm completely unstructured. I'm like, well, I'll just figure this out as I go along. But I'm also a teacher, and that's kind of how I approach every day. And I was thinking about this time and pondering, writing things down, and of course things come into my mind and stuff. But I found that much like teaching a class or talking to anybody or doing things, sometimes the best things to say come at the moment that they occur. And I look out at these folks here, and I was thinking earlier how thankful I am that so many people came from a long way away, and people that have known my parents for a long time. Some of them haven't seen my mom and dad in a long time, but you guys were all impacted somewhat profoundly by them, and I really, really do appreciate that, and I know that they would too, and they would probably be among those that would do the same as well, And it's interesting how like we do events and sometimes in life there's like mysteries that are solved and stuff. We had conversations the other night about things that we probably didn't know about, my mom and dad. And some of those were enlightening, but my dad was in the Navy. And I learned a mystery. I had one solved like literally 25 or 30 minutes ago, because anybody that's ever been to the pool with my dad, he had a pretty hairy chest and stuff, and I always wanted to, how did his chest get so hairy? But I just had some of this Navy coffee like 20 minutes ago, and I have solved that mystery, because I too have a hairy chest, and it must have gone through, because I'm like, well, it's good. Maybe if you added more cream, but I don't do that. So that's it. And my mom liked music more than my dad. I know my dad liked sound, but my mom, quoting for Craig to quote a song or parts of a song regarding my mom is very prescient, because my mom loved her songs, and she would listen to the same songs over and over again. And my daughter Kenny and I, we took her, prior to my sister's road trip, we volunteered for a road trip to take her around and visit people in the Northeast. And part of it was I get to drive in the Northeast, but the other part was my dad's gone, and we could take mom to see old friends, some of whom I'm like, who is this person? I've never even heard of this lady or this. Well, there are a couple, there are ladies, but my mom had this uncanny ability to knock on doors, and there's this like 88-year-old woman in this little tiny, like, if anybody's ever seen Schitt's Creek, it's basically like, that's where she lived, in Rhode Island. And I'm like, what? And it's like, oh, Missy, come in. And then we all went to eat at this like place that shouldn't be in business, but it is. And, and they just talked and talked and talked. And it was really, really neat to see. And in a way, I took one for the team to go on a trip with my mom, because she could be interesting. But as you all know, for all of those, and you all probably are like, I know what she's talking about. Yeah. But there are some indelible qualities that permeated everything about her that really were much more profound than any sort of like eye roll or anything like that you would get. As challenging as parts of that trip was, it was also just wonderful to drive around with my mom and to see these places. And we saw places that like her brother Michael had been in the Northeast, when he was younger, and she remembered these names of these towns and things. And that meant a lot to her, and so it meant a lot to me. And of course, having my own daughter be around her granddaughter, I thought was great. And that trip was really good. But it also got me thinking about, my dad in music. And one of my favorite songs is called Dust in the Wind. Most of you know by Kansas, Dust in the Wind. And one of the reasons why I like that song is because I think it was a summer of 1978. We were driving somewhere, and that song came on, and my dad elucidated that he liked the song. He said something like, oh, I like this song. And I remember that because I remember the memory that I have is being surprised that my dad likes the song. Because I never knew him to like songs. I knew that we played music. My mom was always like, putting the K-Tel records and stuff on. So that was always on, and my mom always chose the music. But for my dad to say that he likes this song, I thought was pretty interesting. And I've always remembered that. That happened when I was a young boy. And we have fleeting memories from that age, but it's a very profound memory that I have now. And I think back to why that would be a profound memory. And one of the reasons why I think is because the words that Steve used to describe my dad, like stoic and loyal and all of those things, that describes a very calm, very competent person, a very predictable person, like an engineer, like my dad was. And that's how he was, and that's how I think I always viewed him. And then, growing up as his son, that like deeply impacted me as I grew. And there's times that I remember that brought that to light. Like, for example, when we moved from China Lake to Virginia Beach, my brother John and I had this pipe dream that we were somehow going to like squirrel our way back to China Lake and be with our friends again, even though of course that was never going to happen. And we were kind of dismayed that we had to live in Virginia Beach, and it was different than the mountains and the desert and stuff. And I remember my dad was really diplomatic and nice. He wasn't like, a browbeater, but he said, look, you have choices in life. You're the ones that are choosing to dislike this place. This is what we're doing. We're living here, and you can decide to like it, find things you like, or you can decide not to. And that's up to you. And of course, obviously I remember that very well. And that's something that I thought, that's absolutely the right way of looking at something, But that song "Dust in the Wind," it's very simple. All we are is dust in the wind. And I don't know if we like that song because of the message of the song or the melody of the song, but in a way, that's kind of how my dad viewed life. And he viewed that we're here, we do things, and he understood from a scientific perspective, our existence and how small we are in this universe. So maybe he did think about it that way. But he also looked at his impact in the world much larger than that. And that's why if he could have had another project at Lockheed or something else doing what he loved, he would have jumped on that. He would have worked until the day he passed away. And I was with him the day that he had to stop working because he was trying to do chemo and work. And not because he was trying to be a superhero, but because that's what he did. He worked on stuff, and he was just not going to stop doing what he loved and doing what he was devoted to and what he was called to do. And until it was like, Chris, you're not going to live more than 2 weeks or a week unless you stop. And then he did until he got better. But of course he got right back in the saddle. And that's just who my dad was. And and thinking back on his demeanor, and I'm a tennis coach, and so I'll watch tennis videos, and I thought, he had the Roger Federer face before Roger Federer was born. And if anybody has ever watched Roger Federer do some, just an amazing rally, 26 hits, and he finally hits this wonderful slice. And, Andy Murray might be just, barely, getting back to his position to receive the next serve. And Federer just looks like, just like another moment in life. And my dad, he could do very difficult things, very challenging things, very mentally challenging things. And you never saw that. You never saw that he was upset or that he was angry or that he was frustrated or that anything, because his view on life is like the Nike phrase, and again, he probably came up with that before they had that phrase. So just do it. You just have to do things. And then he always understood the decision we have to make. We can do things and be angry about it, or we can do things and all right, and you don't have to celebrate it, but why not? Because you're doing it, and let's just do that, And so I get some qualities like that from my dad. But then, of course, my mom and my dad were inseparable for over 50 years, and just as much as my mom did need my dad, and I think my dad needed my mom. They were the quintessential, I don't know if there's a word for it, but like the eggshell, that there's only one way to put them together, but they've got to go together to make a whole. And that was them. And my mom and dad were incredibly different people. And when they say the opposites attract and they complement each other, this is like the perfect couple to illustrate that. Because, my mom she wanted to be free, and she wanted to do things in a somewhat unstructured way. My dad kept that, manageable and whatnot. But, as kids, that also made it really, really fun, because whereas my dad might be like, well, maybe we should do, whatever differently. My mom would be like, oh, let's just go ahead and do it. Who cares? We'll figure it out when we get there, and I kind of always loved that spirit, and sometimes she would do things just because. Driving over here, I was thinking I adjusted the thermostat. And I was remembering this time, and I think it was John and I were in the car, and we were going through South Carolina. And it was night, and it was one of those hot summer nights in the South. And we thought, what would be a good idea? Let's turn the heater on to full blast, and the windows up and see how long we can take it. And we're just driving, sweating. It was like that scene from Airplane, just sweat pouring down. We're like, we can go a couple more minutes. And I'm like, who would decide? I could barely drive. I was 16, right? But my mom was like, this is a great idea. Let's do that. And I still look at that as being like, that was fun. I don't know how I lived through that, but that was a really, really fun thing to do. But as quirky as my mom was, and I get a lot of that from her, she was also very emotional. And sometimes as kids, we looked at that as like overbearing. But the only reason she would have ever been what we would have perceived as overbearing is because she loved us so much. And she wanted us to know how much she loved us. And she wanted my dad to know how much she loved him. And she wanted everybody in her life to know how much she loved them. And she was one of those people that truly had her emotions on her sleeve. And my wife and I, we say we love each other every single time we talk to each other. And I got that from my mom and my dad. They wouldn't go, it's got to be a very rare conversation, a rare interaction where we don't say that. Of course we know that, but I want people to know that. But my mom was also so good in giving to people, sometimes to a fault, and sometimes to a point where you might say, well, not a good decision on that one. But I think she was willing to roll the dice and be like, look, if I can do good for 10 people and get screwed by 2, I'll do good by 10. I can take the 2 that took me for something, because the amount of lives that my mom changed, and I wasn't there for a lot of it, but I've heard the wonderful stories, and I've met a lot of people when they lived in Orlando. And any down on their luck person that just stumbled in or worked at Publix or whatever happened that needed a place to stay or needed something, or we were in Fort Sill one time, I think it was for Missy's wedding, and there was a soldier there that didn't have a place to go for Christmas, and she wasn't saying it like, oh, where was me? She was just mentioning like, what are we doing for Christmas? Nothing. I have no place to go. My mom's like, all right, let's make a spot for her in the van, and we're like, okay, and we did. We brought her home. I don't even know her name. I never knew her name, but she just came in, slept in some bed, and had a good time. And my mom and dad fed her, and they took care of her, and they made her feel special, and as an individual, my mom could be difficult. She definitely could be. But I think that all of that was just the byproduct of the love that she had that was just so overwhelming for people, for everybody. And it was really neat to hear that recording of that person that was her caregiver in her last times, because as kids, when we would go visit her, we're like, OMG, she's talking to people like this? But then I would talk to the people, and they loved my mom. And not to say that somebody could be, mistreated, but my mom she loved my dad. She wanted to be with my dad. That's what she wanted. And these people were literal heroes to my mom. But then she also impacted them. And these people deal with thousands of folks in the home that my mom was in. And I guarantee you, ask them in 20 years, what was one of those women or men that you remember the most? And that would be my mom. And they'll remember her for the really good times that they had and the impact that she had on them, whether it was her infectious laughter at just about anything, or just the fact that she would tell people that she loved them, because you know what? She truly did. She truly did. And I was thinking about the theme of this talk, and this is not well, it could be a celebratory occasion, but this is a memorial service. And when I was at work saying, I'll be gone for a few days from the school to go to a memorial service, everyone's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry for you. And I always said I appreciate that, I really do. But this is more than that. It's a celebration of people, and I think it's also a time to reflect on the disparate people around here from all over the place, people that haven't seen each other in untold years, lifetimes for many of the people that have been here. And we're all brought together by individuals, and we all have the same memories, even if one person's memory is from 48 years ago and one person's memory is from 4 months ago. It's the same people, so it's the same relative memories. And so I think that it's best to think about these times of, the happy times, but also, what do we gain from these people? And then what do we gain from one another? And we gain an enormous amount from one another, which means we have an enormous amount to give to one another. And we often, my favorite movie ever is It's a Wonderful Life. And if I look at the character George Bailey, there's a lot of similarities. Like, he loved geography, so do I. He wanted to do things and build things, and I always wanted to do things and build things. And I saw myself in that character when I was 10 years old. But the impact that he had, the whole point of that movie was the impact he had on other people's lives, was very often unseen to him. And most people think of that as a Christmas movie. I think of that as a message of when you do your life and you love people the way you love them, and you treat them the way you treat them, which should be well, because we have the choice to treat people poorly, neutrally, or well. You may as well treat them well if you got that choice. Then you have a really positive impact on people. And you don't need to know that impact. You don't need to feel it. Nobody needs to pat you on the back. You know that if you're a great person, a good person, you're good to folks, you love everybody around you, you tell them that, you make them feel that, you're making an impact on people that's going to permeate through a lot of other people. And I was talking to my Aunt Marilyn earlier today, and I wore a suit today. And I did that for the reason that I'm talking about today, or right now. And when I was at my grandmother's memorial service, I decided to wear a jacket and a tie. And I just did because I thought, well, it's my grandmother, I loved her a lot, and I had one. May as well put it to use. I didn't wear it that often. And so, but at the end of that, the very end, we're doing, everybody's saying their goodbyes and whatnot. And Uncle David came up to me and he pulled me aside and he's like, listen, I want to tell you how much I appreciate you wearing that jacket and that tie. And I'm like, well, thanks. And it didn't really seem that big of a deal to me. He's like, because I really appreciate you honoring my mom that way and thinking about her. And I'm not demeaning anybody who didn't wear a jacket and a tie, but for me, I've always remembered that. And I've always then thought, okay, instead of thinking of things of like, can I get out of wearing a tie for this? I think, should I respect that person personally and as a symbol do this for them? And because it might mean a lot to somebody. And that little thing from David, I remember that. I remember the interaction. I remember the look on his face. That was an aside. That wasn't even a conversation. And if that was that impactful on me, and if my parents are that impactful on all of you, and then I even brought my little one because my little granddaughter Sophia is swirling around back there with my wife. She may not remember it, but I want her to see the impact of family and the love of family and the bonds that we make of family that we're related to and that we just know. Because in a big way, we are all very strongly related. And so I'll just close by saying thank you so much for being here. And just remember that the joyful feelings you have from either my mom or my dad, you probably do give those joyful feelings to a lot of other people. And that's a great power to have. So thank you very much.